Hi there, everybody, and welcome to another one of our live streams. Thank you very much for being here on this Halloween. This is going to be a spectacular episode, I'm sure. And as I said, thank you very much. I think we're broadcasting this one across the known universe. So we're on the YouTubes on this one. We're on Getter, Rumble, all the usual spots. So wherever you are, anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. We've got an interesting week ahead. So I see as you join all the way from Hawaii, Donny Girl, thanks very much. We don't get enough Hawaiians on this platform, so I'm always pleased to see you there. I can see our Philadelphia. I see. Aloha, y'all. So thanks very much for being here. I'm just going to do my usual bit before we bring our special guest on. I just want to do a little double check to make sure that I can see all your comments on the different streams. And I know, again, gosh, wouldn't you know it's Halloween? Because when I look on the old Getter, all I can see is spiders and Jason Miller whizzing across the screen as a vampire. So yeah, it's just one of those nights, isn't it? Or eve afternoons, as the case may be, wherever you are. Yeah, that's coming through loud and clear. Okay. I can see all of what you're saying. Just want to welcome you again. Yes, someone says they're on Mars. You're coming in loud and clear. I'm not sure we quite reached the extremities of the solar system, but we do our best. Anyway, listen. Enough of the waffle. I'm really pleased to have a really interesting guest to share with you this evening, afternoon/morning, depending where you are in the universe. And as I said, we covered lots of stuff here on the platform, as you know, and variety is the spice of life and all of that. But one of the things that's is kind of consistent across so much of which we talk about is matters financial, matters economics. The things that basically are the fundamentals of your life. You go out, you work for a living, you earn income. You try to keep as much of it as you can from thieving government, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, in recent times, we've gone through, all the issues of the raging inflation caused by different things, which we'll come on to talk about in a second. And we're going to chat about what's happening in currencies, international money markets, all the stuff. And who better to talk to about this? And I'm really pleased that he's here. Please welcome onto the stream my special guest, John Tamny. Hi, John.
Hey, David, thank you so much for having me on.
An absolute pleasure, John. And sorry for the technical problems at the beginning, but I knew I was tempting Providence, even having a show on Halloween. So there you go. That's me taught a lesson. John, you're very. You've got a lot of sort of qualifications to your CV. I see editor of RealClearMarkets, Vice President of FreedomWorks, Senior Fellow at the Market Institute. Lots of interesting, experience there, I guess. And John, can I just start off? I mean, look, we seem to be living through absolutely tumultuous economic and financial times. Is that how you read it, or is this just no different to what we've seen back in 2008, 2009?
It's such a good question. And naturally, anytime we live in, we think it's the time, the tumultuous time. But think of what the British people went through and it's so sad, in the 1910s, in the 1940s. And the interesting thing about this is if you lost faith in England as it suffered two horrific world wars, as it embraced socialism after the second one, as it devalued the pound in just horrific ways, right up to basically the early 1980s. If you lost faith, you lost a lot of money because you went into cash instead of the British stock market, and you lost a fortune. And so let's never forget that part of why we think this is tumultuous is because life is so good in places like the United States and England. And so, sure, relative to, 2020, maybe tumultuous, but nothing compared to what people have experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think there's also, John, taking the medium to long term view on things as well. We live at a time where everything's in the moment, John. It's instant. It's just, you've gotta just make all your decisions right here, right now. But I know when I talk to other sort of financial experts, they always say to me, look, take a long-term view, if certainly for making decisions, because short-termism is not a great strategy. Would you agree with that?
Oh, completely. Short term, everything looks bad,
Yeah,
but long
yeah,
term, it gives you that chance for hindsight and everything. And history is clear that if you lose faith in free nations like the US and England and Australia, there's a long list of them, boy, you really miss out. And I would say that's true today. There's a lot wrong, but relative to please tell me, anyone watching, what time in life you'd go back to. Tell me the decade you'd go back to, and I challenge you to find anything that compares to where we are right now in terms of greatness.
you see, that's a really good perspective to take, John, because I think it then puts you in a clear-minded position when you're looking around some of the stuff that's going on. I mean, can I just take you back to well, I guess towards sort of 2019, if we can start there. 2019, things seemed to be going swimmingly, and then along came 2020, and obviously lockdowns and all of the COVID shenanigans that kind of caused an awful lot of problems. And I think from listening to some of the things I know that you've said, John, I think you would share the fact that a lot of the things that are current woes might be traced back to what many governments did back in March, April, and so on and so forth back in 2020.
There's no question. You cannot discuss the tumultuous ways of today without factoring in, and I would say in substantial fashion, that basically the world was locked down to varying degrees, that people lost the right to go to work, to operate their businesses, to socialize with other people. You can't separate that, and we cannot let politicians forget that they chose economic contraction as a way to fight a virus. Historians will marvel at their abject stupidity.
Yeah.
And again, to presume that we wouldn't still be paying the bills for something so incredibly backwards is the height of naivete. Yes, nothing today has any relevance absent a discussion of what happened then.
I think, John, it's such an important point, that because I know when you flip into the political sphere, at this point in time, for example, they talk endlessly about the threat from Putin, the threat from Russia, blah, 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 and how that's driven inflation, etc. And undoubtedly, there is some impact there for sure. But that denies the reality of what happened in 2020 and 2021. As you've rightly pointed out, John, on several occasions, you cannot just close down major economies and then, hit the flick a button and everything comes back to normal, because, well, it doesn't work like that, does it? And
No.
why wouldn't it?
And if you do, and if you say, oh, this is inflation, oh, prices are higher, it's inflation, blame central banks, what you're saying is that basically going to work doesn't matter, that these interconnections among global works doesn't matter, that all that time we were shut down, the work that we would have been doing when we were at home, locked in our houses, was just surplus, which is quite the insult. Which it brings me to a book that was written by a Scotsman, Adam Smith, the greatest economics book ever written, The Wealth of Nations. What does he feature almost within the first few pages? Is the pin factory he visited. One man working alone could maybe complete one pin in a day. Several men working together could complete tens of thousands. Think about that in terms of 2020. We had billions of workers around the world engaged in trillions of different interconnected relationships, only for politicians to eviscerate that. To say that prices are higher today is a statement of the obvious. My only quibble with this is higher prices are not inflation. Inflation is a devaluation of the monetary unit. What we're suffering right now is command and control.
Yeah. I get this, John. Yeah. And I know this is kind of crucial to your argument, because the word inflation is bandied about in so many different ways and beaten out of all sort of shape. And I think it's important. Let's just take a few moments, and the floor is yours, John. Just explain to the people who are watching this all around the world exactly what you mean and how it impacts then into what we find.
Well, inflation, no one earns dollars or pounds or euros or yen, or we earn what they can be exchanged for. Inflation is a shrinkage of the pound, the euro, the dollar.
Yeah.
It is a devaluation. Was it in the 1920s or in the 1930s that Great Britain very famously, and to the huge devastation of its citizenry, left the stability of a gold-defined pound?
Right.
It was something that people were not so much riding on the streets, but they were devastated by it. Because in so doing, the pound was suddenly worthless. Their savings were worthless.
Mm.
In the past 2 years, the dollar has actually risen against the euro, the pound, the yen.
Yeah.
But really more importantly than that is that the dollar has risen against gold, the most objective measure. It's not that the pound is weak. It's just that the dollar is stronger than the pound right now. And so, but if we're going to make this inflation, this would be defined in a way that's never been defined before. Inflation is what the Brits experienced in the 1970s and the 1920s, a devaluation of the unit. That's not what's happening right now. That's not what's happening in the United States right now.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's when the currency is devalued. That's the core problem. But why is the US dollar still so strong against the likes of, say, sterling or the euro? I mean, it's remarkable this year to see the what I see is a fairly strong, well, relatively strong dollar and a pretty weak euro and sterling.
Yeah, it's surprising at least in the last 20 or so years, the euro's risen against the dollar. Certainly the pound was higher than the dollar much of that time. I would argue that a big factor of it comes that people can give President Biden demerits and positives. They can love him or hate him. But one thing he hasn't done, and one thing his treasury hasn't done, is ever really talk down the dollar. And that wasn't true under President Trump. It wasn't true under President Obama. It certainly wasn't true under George W. Bush. There was this desire to bring the dollar down, wrong-headed though it was. That was what presidents wanted. We haven't gotten that from Biden. So I think to some degree, the dollar's risen because Biden hasn't been talking it down.
And why do you think the likes of President Trump talked it down?
The likes of President Trump, what?
Why do you think he wanted to talk?
Donald Trump, remember when he was running for president, he strongly believed, against all evidence, and this isn't me getting mean about Trump. I just like politicians in general. He believed that the Japanese and the Chinese, as an example, were beating the United States by cheapening their currencies. Now, all evidence supported the opposite. If you look, the yen has crushed the dollar over the last 40, 50 years, really since 1971. The yuan is up against the dollar for the most part over the last, 10 or so years. But Trump was making the argument that other countries were cheapening their currencies and in doing so making them more competitive against the U.S. Not true. You can't improve your competitive position by weakening your currency. I mean, that's just a statement of the obvious. But Trump made that case. George W. Bush made that case. From that, you can get a weaker currency.
Yeah, because they did pursue policies to weaken the dollar vis-a-vis those other competitive economies around the world. And what you're saying is that's a fundamental mistake. When you do that, you actually, you shoot yourself in the foot.
Of course, you very much shoot yourself in the foot because remember, English people earn pounds. How does it help them if the pound that they go to work for every day is suddenly exchangeable for less and less? Yeah, let's also remember, and this is true of the dollar too, let's remember that when the way that companies are created and the way that jobs are created is from investment. When you invest, you're buying future dollar income streams. You're buying future returns in pounds. Why would you invest? Why would you save and invest if the policy favors devaluation? So you look at this over the last 40, 50 years, is it any surprise that the British economy was so weak in the 1970s? Devaluation was the policy. It was
Yep.
similarly the policy of the United States. In the 80s and 90s, the policy reversed in favor of pound and dollar strength. Is it any surprise that both economies took off? Investment is what drives economic growth. Devaluation is anti-investment. And sadly, politicians continue to misunderstand this or not learn this basic truth.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen, John, this side of the pond in recent times, we've seen a tremendous amount of turmoil. I'm sure you read about changes in prime minister. We've gone through four prime ministers in 4 months. I lose track of the number, but a lot of that was over economic policies there was a school of thought here in the UK that was tried to be implemented and catastrophically rejected by the establishment, I guess, that we should be trying in the UK to reduce the taxation burden on corporations and on individuals, and that in itself that would lead to economic growth. Where would you stand in that? Is that a stupid idea or is that a good idea?
It's a great idea. If Liz Truss had stuck to it, she'd still be prime minister. I mean, this notion that the markets were reacting negatively to a reduced penalty placed on work and a reduced penalty placed on corporations defies basic common sense.
Yeah.
And the idea that markets didn't like that, oh, please. The idea that markets were worried about deficits in England. Let's remember that Great Britain had a quote budget deficit of 260% of GDP in 1815. And it went on to have its greatest decade and century of economic growth in history. That is not me supporting government spending. Government spending is a tax.
Yep.
But let's be clear, rich countries that are growing can run up all sorts of debt. And so the idea that a reduced tax burden that could only lift Great Britain's economy was somehow going to make it harder for it to service its debt just vandalizes reason. And shame on Liz Truss for not standing by some very simple and good beliefs, but shame on her party for not standing by her. If the Tories aren't cutting taxes, what are they doing? Are they just going to get us into dumb wars? And I say that the same thing about the Republicans in the United States. If they're not cutting taxes, what on earth are they doing?
Well, that's a great question, because I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Margaret Thatcher came in back in the late 1970s, and she basically set about the business of reducing taxation across the board. It took some time to work, but it did work, and it transformed Britain significantly. So, John, I thought Liz Truss was probably right to instinctively cut taxes. That's the right thing to do. So I couldn't understand why why were we told that the money markets hated this when couldn't this was terrible and that therefore she had to go? Because that's how it was sold. It was the money markets brought her down in favor of a candidate who has stated he's going to increase. I mean, we're going to be slaughtered on corporation tax, on personal. We're going to be slaughtered, and the markets favor that. How can that be, John?
The explanation was nonsense. I mean, let's first of all say it's possible the markets were reacting negatively, thinking that she wasn't going far enough in reducing the income and corporate taxes. But I would add that, remember, at the same time that markets were buffeting in England, they're cascading downward around the world.
Yeah,
and it's any surprise. And so in England, we're supposed to believe, oh, yeah, it was talk of tax cuts that was causing markets to correct, but markets around the world were correcting at the same time. So the explanation never made sense. And then I would add, remember what was also on the front page of every major newspaper in the world that at the same time that Truss was announcing proposed tax cuts. Vladimir Putin wasn't just talking nuclear war, but it was becoming a very serious presumption. Markets half the price possibilities. That's why they exist, to tell us about what the future could look like. So was this about tax cuts, which could only be good for Great Britain's economy, or was it broad market fear of a very uncertain world, including Russia, potentially someone on the continent talking about nuclear war? I mean, I think this notion that the tax cuts caused markets to correct was an utter non sequitur.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating observation because everything pivoted on that. I mean, her leadership pivoted upon that what was being sold to us as, yeah, look, Liz, the markets have gone against you. The markets have spoken. You've got to go out the door. You go, because that's how it was sold. I would have my own suspicions about it as well, John. It's just as you said, it's counterintuitive. It really is. Cutting tax in business is always a good idea. Letting people keep more of their hard-earned money is a good idea, and it's a conservative value, be it in the US or be it in the UK. Maybe in socialist countries they don't like it, but I would have thought it was at the essence of what we're about.
It most certainly is, and I think history will say that she missed a huge chance to be the next great leader. Instead, she didn't stand up for what makes sense, and people, I think my guess is Tory voters in particular aren't going to stick by someone who doesn't believe in something so fundamental to the party. And it'll be the same in the US. As I said before, if Republicans aren't cutting taxes, they have no purpose in office because they're not good at other things, including the wars they get us into.
Yeah. But as you say, the strange thing is during the Biden, the last couple of years, say what you will about Biden, and we've said a lot about Biden. But on some things, he hasn't wrecked the dollar. He hasn't talked down the dollar. I'm not sure if there've been significant tax changes, John, for ordinary American people, for U.S. business. Have there?
Not major. There was a slight tax increase recently that was ill-conceived. But look, you make the right point, and I would put it as the equivalent of the best player on Manchester City trash talking someone on Wrexham. Why would you do it? And it's the same idea here. Joe Biden is the definition of empty suit. He doesn't have any political skills. He's just a lifelong. Why would we be trashing him? Now, if you want to go after Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, two very good politicians who could do some damage because they are good politicians, sure. But attacking Biden as though someone as minor as he could wreck the greatest country on earth. Sorry, I believe it. I think U.S. is number one. It never made sense. And I think Republicans shrank themselves by making this so much about Biden, and they do to this day.
Yeah. Well, John, one of the things that, just recently, I know you've just brought out a new book called The Money Confusion. It's on screen there. How illiteracy about currencies, inflation sets the stage for the crypto revolution. Well, you see, this is a very intriguing title and a very intriguing train of thought. So just talk us through what you're driving at here, John, because I think we've touched on some aspects of it, but let's see if we can expand it a bit.
Well, I think that cryptocurrencies are what I'd refer to them as private money.
Yeah.
I think they've come about as a market response to growing mistrust among people of government currencies, of the pound, the dollar, the euro, the yen. These are the best currencies in the world. They're the currencies of finance. If you want to do any deal around the world, there's about 5 or 6 currencies that you'd use, and the pound and dollar are among the foremost of them. But people who own pounds know that periodically they've seen their wealth shrunken through devaluation. We've certainly seen it here in the United States.
Yep.
And so I think private money is just a natural response. Ask yourself the question, would Sainsbury, if it issued private pounds, would it devalue them? Would Amazon in the US, if it issued an Amazon dollar, would it devalue? I don't think so. But we know by definition throughout history, every time government's gotten involved with a currency, there have been bouts of devaluation that have robbed the citizenry. And so I just think this is a market response that it's inevitable. At some point, we just switch from government currencies to ones we can trust.
But the thing about crypto, crypto really fascinates me. I bought into crypto some years ago. And held my nerve and blah, 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 blah. So I'm happy about that. But what we've seen is crypto's taken a bit of a bashing over the past, 6 to 8, this year, really, I suppose. Why is that?
It's beautiful. That's the argument I make in the book that says that's why we're heading toward a crypto future, a private money future. Because remember, what was about 22 years ago, remember when all the internet companies went bust?
Yeah.
People said, internet's over. Oh, that was a fad. All those ridiculous companies bubble, all that lazy nonsense talk. But in the 20 years since, the internet has become a fact of life, and a brilliant fact of life. Look at how you and I are communicating. We could never have dreamed of this in the year 2001, yet look at what we're doing right here. It strikes me that we're seeing something the same with crypto. Of course, any new big business commercial development is going to have a lot of losers, because investment in good and bad ideas is how we progress. It's how we learn. And so it strikes me that the very fact that crypto is in a downslide, that's the surest sign that this is our future, because that's the market's way of saying we're getting serious about this. We're about to put out to pasture what doesn't make sense, and we're going to start focusing our investment dollars on the ideas that work.
So things like, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum or such, these other crypto coins, are those the ones that you think are part of the future?
My guess is no. Now, if I knew exactly, I'd be a billionaire. But my guess is, you probably remember the company Netscape. Remember, it was the original IPO that kicked off the IPO boom and internet and all that. I think that Bitcoin is Netscape. Essential, because Netscape is what pulled in lots of investment into new ideas. My sense is that Bitcoin has been the catalyst for enormous advances in the private money space, but it can never be money. And the reason it can't be money is its value isn't stable, and there's no intention of making it stable. That which is limited in supply or number is naturally going to fluctuate. Well, money that fluctuates rarely emerges as money in any society. It's what's stable that becomes money. And so my strong sense is that what emerges as money is something we're not thinking about right now. I would guess, it wouldn't surprise me if it's JP Morgan dollars, Amazon dollars, Barclays dollars, entities that have an incentive to issue a currency that holds its value. That's what you'd rather earn, because you can say, you can basically, rather than be paid in pounds or dollars, you can be paid in this private money. And Barclays is not going to devalue on you. Amazon's not going to. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the U.S. Treasury, they've historically always devalued on us.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, John, people talk about is like governments themselves bringing out their own crypto. I mean, here in the UK, we talk about a Britcoin being central bank digital currency, the central bank digital currencies. Is that part of the future, do you think? Because people,
it's going to be trying to be part of the future. Central banks, I make a case in the book that central banks their role in the economy is vastly overstated in the U.S. and also anywhere else in the world. But forget about that. Look at government's history with money. So the central banks and other monetary authorities around the world try to issue their own money, but they've already done that. Who are you going to trust? Governments that have always devalued, or private businesses? And so, they'll try to be relevant. Our Federal Reserve is desperate for relevance. It keeps looking for a reason to exist because it has no reason. But let's be honest, it's not going to win this. Capitalism is going to outrun central banks.
Well, that's actually, I'm glad to hear that, because, as you say, why would I have any confidence in central banks to do anything? But maybe we do overrate the importance of these central banks, because it seems to me, I take a great interest in the Bank of England, for example, and its performance, and it's shockingly bad. They never get anything right. It's from an economics point of view. I remember I met one of the one of the governors of the Bank of England, and he seemed a reasonably sensible chap. But when you look at what they were forecasting, John, and what they were saying, completely wrong. I mean, honestly, the guy in the street would have as good a guess as some of the stuff they've been, especially in the last few years.
By definition, of course, if they could forecast well, they wouldn't be working at the Bank of England or the Fed. They'd be billionaires. Of course, they're going to get it wrong. So their forecasts are awful. So what do we need them for? Oh, they set the overnight rate that banks lend to each other. Oh, that's a market rate. Anyone can do that. They regulate the banks. How have they done there? Walter Bagehot, of course, said lender of last resort. But see, no solvent financial institution would ever go to a central bank for a loan because it's an admission of bankruptcy. We just don't need them. And if you look at it more broadly, what are the most dynamic businesses in Great Britain and the United States? None of them, precisely because they're dynamic, have ever relied on bank finance as is, because banks have to perform. So it's venture capitalists that fund these ideas. The Fed's irrelevant to economic growth. And I would submit that the Bank of England's irrelevant to economic growth in England. They've, of course, hoodwinked so many into believing what they do is of import. But when you think about it, and again, I argue extensively about it in my book, they just don't matter much one way or the other. And in time, we will look back on this and we'll say, why did we ever take them seriously?
I think that's such an interesting point, John, because the tragedy is, and maybe it's because the media bigs them up so much. I mean, we're hanging on their every word. We're hanging on the next, the next hike in interest rates. I think you're due one, aren't you, the next week or so? And I know we're going to be having a whopper one coming along very shortly as well. But yeah, they're portrayed as if there's some kind of economic geniuses. And I'm afraid, as you say, the reality doesn't validate that at all.
Not at all. The idea that if they could control the cost of credit, the U.S. and British economies would be so bad right now that we wouldn't even be doing this. You and I would be out working on the streets. Think about it. Central planning failed, and it failed in murderous, impoverished fashion in the 20th century. To then pretend that, well, it all failed stupendously, but central banks just set the cost of credit for the world. Oh, please. It insults reason. How we know they're not important is that we live in two of the most prosperous countries on earth.
Yeah. And as you said, it is that central planning kind of myth that has proven itself to be historically a complete disaster. And so why would it be any different? Why would it be any different? Why would it be any different over the last couple of years when essentially we had a command and central planning kind of approach to our economy? So yeah, you're right, John. It's well. So in terms of so you think it's going to be then the future will be moving into these forms of crypto that we don't quite get yet at the moment because they're not necessarily in front of us. Is that what you think?
Well, you hit it so well. We don't quite get it. And why? My strong sense is that many in the crypto crowd are approaching money in the way that economists approach the economy, as in they're making what do they call it? In the U.S., we call it 12th grade. Is it 12th form in England, a 12th form problem out of a first year problem? Money is simple. As Adam Smith said, and it's the opening line of my book in quotes, the sole use of money is to circulate consumable goods. Adam Smith nailed it centuries ago. That's all money is. It's a stable measure that emerges in any society. The government never needs to force it. Wherever there's production, there is always money as though it's dropped down by an invisible hand to exchange the fruits of actual production. And so think of it this way. A capitalist system that can put a supercomputer in my pocket can certainly create a credible measure that we start circulating. We go into shops and we say, do you take Amazon dollars? Do you take Barclays dollars? Gradually, they start taking them because they know they're trustworthy. And gradually, people start accepting them. That's how I see it. It's essential because governments have failed us on the matter of money for so long. Capitalism can fix this between breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, the genius of capitalism is it its ability to fix things that certainly politicians can't fix and governments can't fix. But so this is so okay. I'm really interested in this. Is how what's the future for the dollar then, John? Where's the dollar going to be in 5 years, 10 years? Still there?
I think the dollar will surprise you to hear this. I think the dollar will be improved by this. The dollar needs more competition. All government currencies do. And so if you have these private monies emerging, the U.S. Treasury will have no choice but to focus on dollar price stability. So I don't think it probably ever disappears. And think about why. A lot of people, say my parents, 78 and 80, are they going to switch to private money? Probably not. The comfort of the paper dollar in their pocket. Who's going to switch to private money and carry us all along? Young people. Young people are going to show us how to do this in much the same way that when the 21st century dawned, most transactions were still fulfilled via U.S. mail or the postal service in Britain.
Yeah.
We put checks in the mail. Now more and more we do it on a computer.
Yeah.
Young people carried us into this future. I'm of the view that young people who've never known anything but the computer and the internet at all are going to carry us into this private money future. They'll show us how to use it.
And okay, some people say though that one of the concerns that we have to look out for would be to move into a world where it is crypto fundamentally that's driving everything, but that the central governments are controlling the crypto. And is your interpretation, John, that you don't, that's overhyping it a bit? That's not likely to be the case, because you can see, for example, in countries like China is a good example, where they use control of money through crypto to control their citizenry. If you get a bad social credit score and you go out to buy that, whatever you're going to buy, yeah, it might just go through. Is that over amplified in your opinion? That threat?
I think so. For one, to go to China, for one, is to be staggered by how advanced it is and how they're having a love affair with all things American, for one, but certainly British too. And so I think there's a tendency to overstate just how shackled they are. These are people who are enormously productive, and their advances in finance and in getting loans to people literally within seconds is way ahead of us. But it's a good question more broadly. What does this mean? Can government get in the way? Can the government basically strangle this?
No.
I think not. And I take you back to this again. I've got an app on this phone from Uber that has basically taken down global taxi cartels from around the world. I just tap this and a car shows up.
Yeah.
And I don't have to deal with that anymore. Oh my gosh, capitalism is so fast. And there's no way. See, government can't regulate it, can't control what it doesn't understand and what it doesn't see. Government doesn't understand money, and we know this because it keeps devaluing the very money that if it didn't devalue, the world would be much more prosperous. And I think you're going to see the same thing here. Private money is going to hit them in whiplash fashion, and in a way that by the time they figure out that, we should regulate this, it's going to be too far gone, kind of the way that Uber was. It was too far advanced by then.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very encouraging vision for me, John, because it addresses some of the concerns I would have, and like you, I find the way that the governments devalue our currencies extraordinarily annoying. And if I looked at a chart recently, British pound over the past, I think it was the past about 120 years, something like that, and it's shocking when you see the sustained. The devalue, and it was politically driven in many instances, points of devaluation. And you think to yourself, if they hadn't have been able to do that, things would have been so much better. But that's the problem when you give politicians control. Quick question, John. I'm sure you saw there may be a change in Brazil. I saw there with a change of regime. Do you think that's going to have any economic consequences?
Great question. My guess is not too much. Let's never forget that this is Lula's second go round. I forget when was he elected the last time, but when he was elected, there was big fear. Oh, wow, socialist in office and everything. And again, I'm anti-socialism. I think it's a horrible ideology. But never forget that stock markets and bond markets are the most powerful force in the world. They're more powerful than a nuclear weapon. Nothing's more powerful than the markets. Lula could move far from Bolsonaro's right of center views, and he would do so at his peril. You just can't do that in the modern world. Look at how labor in Great Britain has moved to the center in many ways. Look at how the Democrats were forced in the U.S. to back away. The markets don't allow you to move too far, and I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right. Another question, John, if I may. Obviously, we've got midterms coming up in a week's time or so, and then we've got a presidential election in 2024. Do you think a return of someone like Donald Trump to the White House, would that be good for global economy? What's your thoughts on Trump from an economics perspective?
Very good question. I think it would be good for the global economy Not so much because I agree with all of Trump's policies. I'm a free trader, as an example, and I thought the demonization of China by both sides was horrifying.
Mm.
If you gave me the choice, the U.S. would have far more open borders. I think the arrival of strivers is what made the U.S. the U.S.
Mm.
At the same time, Trump, as you well know, is very much a polarizing figure. Everyone hates Donald Trump in a way other than his base of supporters.
Mm.
And so the beauty of that is a guy like Trump's not going to be making deals around the world. He's not going to be making deals in Washington that wind up costing a lot of money, that wind up expanding government. Trump is the anti-deal marker. He's a polarizing figure. And I think that's healthy for an economy.
Yeah. And do you think during that first 4 years that he had in, do you think that broadly that was a good period economically for the US? Because or what's your thoughts on that? His first.
Such a good question. I was skeptical when he was elected. I'm a libertarian, small L, as in I just think that freedom is what makes sense. Donald Trump didn't intend for it, but you could make an argument that his was the most libertarian presidency in my lifetime. The tax cuts weren't large enough, but you got tax cuts. You got good Supreme Court justices where he basically outsourced it to a very libertarian organization called the Federalist Society. The list is long. He was skeptical of a lot of the foreign adventurism that had happened. Deregulation on his watch was ferociously good. Donald Trump didn't intend for it, but a lot of good things happened. And so I think polarizing figures are very good for an economy. So again, I wasn't a fan. I wrote a column right before he was elected saying that he was the wrong man. And maybe he was, but boy, it worked out in a lot of ways. And that's what made me so sad about January 6th. I'll just leave it there. I hated that some achievements that no one expected to happen were besmirched by one day.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about him being a polarizing figure, because I can remember, John, very vividly. Margaret Thatcher was exactly the same. She was an incredibly polarizing figure, and yet during her decade in power, in Downing Street in London, the United Kingdom rose up in so many ways and cast off so much of the darkness that we'd seen in the 70s through stewardship of socialists in the form of Labour. So sometimes, as you say, polarizing figures can be really good, rather than those like I looked at people like I don't know, like say Trudeau up in Canada and whatnot. I mean, I don't think that they contribute anything very much, really. They don't.
Government can't. Government cannot contribute. And it's sad that has to be a libertarian statement, but the people are remarkable, and the people are the marketplace. And so anyone who's limited in terms of what they do, and again, Donald Trump, because he's Donald Trump, was never going to pass a lot of laws. He was never going to be Lyndon Johnson or someone like that.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is, you say, thank goodness for that. Lyndon Johnson expanded us into Vietnam. He expanded government massively. You want guys that no one likes because they can't get a lot done. They're distracted. The famous Arthur Laffer, who obviously loved and was close to Margaret Thatcher, voted for Bill Clinton twice. And why did he? Well, he did because he thought, this guy is too distracted with the women and all this other stuff. That's exactly who you want in office.
Yeah, exactly. Have people who are too busy doing other things to mess about and muck up the economy. Yeah. I mean, I see a couple of comments. I'm just going to read a couple of comments I see flowing in different streams here. I see Jason O'Brien over in YouTube says, Wall Street funds the Democrats. Do you agree with that?
There's some truth to that, but that in a way, a lot of Democrats on Wall Street there's a lot of Democrats on Wall Street. I would say overall, that's a happy scenario because I love what Wall Street does and I love what the city does. They find finance for the businesses that banks can't touch. Investment banks do the really heavy lifting. And the fact that Wall Street funds so much of the Democrats, I think keeps the Democrats in line. They can talk their rhetoric about raising taxes on the rich and getting tough on the rich. but ultimately they know from whom they get their money, and that saves us from some really bad legislation.
I see also, John, again, in the interest of getting people engaged here, I see there's quite a bit of pushback on your comment that you would like to see more open borders. I think there's pretty much consensus is, nope, we don't need more open borders. How much more open can they get, asks H.W. Logan, all the way from the potato state of Idaho. So, John, your response?
Well, I think it's a very good point. How much more open can they get? And isn't that the point? In any country where the economy is growing, people figure out a way to get across the border. And so if you want to shut the borders down in the US or anywhere else in the world, it's really kind of easy. Just crush the economy and people will stop coming. If you look at the US from 2009 to 2014, more Mexican people crossed back into Mexico than came over. Well, why? Because it was a relatively slow time economically for the United States. And so what attracts the world's strivers is economic growth. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. I think if we allowed markets to work, if we legalized work, we would see a lot of people coming in and working, not bringing grandma, not bringing mother, not bringing the kids, coming into work because they're needed and then going back. And I think it's a shame that we've politicized this. In a free, if we could have an open discussion free of the politics, I think we could come to a much better solution that would involve a legalization of people coming in and out.
Yeah, and you think the economy would adjust then proportionately for, you bring in a couple of million people come in, that's all going to be fine then, economically wise speaking?
Oh, yeah, of course. And people say, well, they're worried about, in the US, they always say, well, they're worried about cheap labor overseas. Well, if the labor were here, by definition, it would earn quite a bit more because there's a lot more investment in the worker in the United States. And so it would drive up the value. There's this notion that immigrants would drive down labor. Oh, really? Or the cost of the hourly wages. Really? How? American women entered the workforce en masse over the last several decades. Are wages down? The U.S. has been attracting immigrants for centuries now. So is England. Did that bring wages down? In fact, it's where the immigrants are going that wages are most going up. That's why they're coming to your country in the first place.
Yeah, but although, just to push back on that from a UK perspective, we have the scale, I'm sure you well know this, John, the scale of migrants coming into the UK is nothing compared to the US. I mean, you know, we're outraged because we've had 40,000 this year. You know, that's yeah, exactly. So you get the picture. But the interesting thing is that these are economic migrants. I mean, they are passing through developed European economies like Germany, like Italy, like France to come to the UK. I find it hard to understand how is that economic migration when they could equally settle in any of those other countries and have a good life? How, you know, it's why do they? Is it for work or is it for other reasons, do you think?
I think it's for work. I mean, look, you can always find the exceptions where they're coming maybe because maybe you guys have good benefits. And people say that about them in the US. Oh, yeah. Come on. They're coming to England and the US because they're the two most opportunity-laden countries on earth. What could be more flattering? What could be better for your economy than bringing in more human capital? That is what made the U.S. great. And it's so in my fourth book called "They're Both Wrong," I talk about, the Irish. Benjamin Disraeli back in the 19th century said that the Irish were savages on a level that you just couldn't civilize them. Don't allow them in. Don't allow them in. And look at how they've thrived in England and in the United States. Every new arrival comes in a bit scruffy. Well, that's the point. That's why they're coming to your country. They want something better. And I think it's unfortunate that this has been so needlessly politicized. I don't think we have a problem of immigrants. We have a problem of not enough of them. It's the countries they're not going to that have the biggest problems.
Meaning those other countries in what?
Yeah, but if they're not attracting strivers, what does that say about the country? So Tony Blair once said it about the United States. He was asked, do you think the U.S.'s best days are behind it? And he had a really good answer. He said, you have a tendency to see countries with the best days behind it where people stop trying to risking their lives getting to that country. And that doesn't describe the United States. People keep risking their lives to get here. And to me, that's a beautiful thing.
Well, where I totally do agree with you, the United States and the United Kingdom are very much magnets for people wanting to come. I mean, to come into those countries, you don't get it in anything like the same we find anyway over here with countries like France and Germany, even though Germany's a very successful economy, or at least it was until the gas got turned off. But that notwithstanding that whole issue, and yet they bypass those countries, John, and they get on their dinghies and they cross the English Channel and they come here. And it's a similar scenario with you guys, I guess, on the southern border. They want to get to the United States, the land of milk and honey. But I think it's fascinating, the things that drive economic behavior from migrants' point of view, I suppose. But I can see a lot of people. Do you differentiate between legal and illegal immigration? Asks someone.
That's always brought up, and my response is, if the same rules applied to immigrants 200 years ago or 300 to today, most of us wouldn't be in the United States. At some point, we have to say, well, if the rules are ridiculous, people are going to evade the rules. And in this case, we're the most economically vibrant country on earth. That foreigners want to be here is a statement of the obvious. And so the question is, are we going to allow this market phenomenon to assert itself? Or are we, who are allegedly for limited government, going to expand the government in order to keep people from crossing our border, and doing so unsuccessfully? Let's not forget that they are, as long as economic growth is a fact of life, and I think hopefully it will always be that way in the U.S., they're going to be coming here. The question is, do we want them dying and risking their lives and risking their families to get here? Do we want to say, let's legalize this so that men, able-bodied men, can come here when their work is needed and they can go back to their families when it's not needed?
Just a couple of final questions. What's your view, John, over the next maybe 20, 30 years of China and the United States? Do you think China will gain global economic hegemony, or what's your thoughts?
Well, I think this notion of economic hegemony is just, it's kind of what is that? How do companies grow? They grow by meeting the needs of people. And it's fascinating to visit China. Everywhere you look is a McDonald's, a Dairy Queen, a Burger King, a Nike store, an Apple store, a Microsoft store. The Chinese are conducting a love affair with all things American right now. And so if they keep growing economically, boy, the U.S. is going to get rich. The richest country on earth will get exponentially richer, simply because if they can keep dividing up the work with the Chinese, and if the Chinese market for U.S. goods keeps growing, wow, we're going to be a rich nation. So to me, the answer is obvious. Why are we demonizing them? And this notion, well, they want to be a world power. When has there ever been one world power? There was always France to England. There's always Germany to England. This notion that Americans should expect, and I love the United States. I'm the biggest fan. I get teary-eyed thinking about how lucky I am to be an American. But I do think it's odd that we just have this expectation that the Chinese don't get to be prideful, that they don't want to protect what's theirs, that they don't want to have a military and all that. But at least what I know from visiting a fair amount is, boy, they love all things American. Why are we turning our nose up to it?
And then another quick one, John, as regards the petrodollar, the U.S. petrodollar, do you think all the shenanigans happening in the energy markets around the world at the moment, do you think that could become economically harmful or economically advantageous to the United States?
Well, it shouldn't. There's this view that if the U.S. doesn't pump oil here, that we won't have the oil. Oh, please. England teaches us this in the 19th century. For just about all the 19th century, England was at war with just about every major European power at one point. Yet it still imported all their goods, just imported from them from those they sold it to. The notion that OPEC could keep its oil from coming to the United States defies basic economics. OPEC countries can embargo us, but we'll buy the oil from those they sell it to. And so what I always tell people is that the U.S. could be 100% bereft of oil, at war with every oil producing nation on earth, or embargoed by every oil producer on earth, yet we'd still consume all the oil as though it had bubbled up in West Texas. And we would, because we'd buy it from those they sold it to. If you're productive, every import you want will show up in split-second fashion to your country. And so I think we overstate it by a mile, and politicians love to overstate it because it gives them power. Oh, hey, we've got to go to war. We've got to do this and that because we've got to make sure we've got oil. Oh, please. Oil's always going to get to you.
Yeah, because one of the strange things in the European Union at the moment, we see they've got their big embargo against, Russian oil. But all this, well, I'm sure you know, so all that's happening is, I mean, I think the Russians are supplying it to the Chinese, actually.
Chinese and Indians. They're still, the oil's still being sold.
I know. Yeah,
it's always going to. Putin can't stop selling the oil, nor is he going to give up such a big market.
No, agree.
And the idea that it's not as though in 1973 that the OPEC nations stopped selling the oil. Of course, they kept selling it, and we kept buying it. We just bought it from those they didn't sell to. And Great Britain again taught us this in the 19th century. They were at war with all these countries, sadly, but they're still getting all their goods and services. It's just a question of whom you get them from.
I think would it be fair to sum it up as it's a differentiation between political hubris on the one point and economic realities on the other. Essentially, the market does sort things out in the final analysis.
Always. Markets always speak their piece. And on this one, the idea that Russia could keep its natural gas and oil from the rest of the world vandalizes reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've made such a big deal of it in the European Union about teaching, Russia a lesson. But the gas is still flowing in. It's just it comes from a different flag. But as you say, going back to the 18th century and the British lesson, that's neither here nor there. You're still going to end up getting it, So, look, John, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and to speak with you. And just to bring up again on screen, please, everybody, if you want to get, I think, a really interesting perspective. Here's John's latest book. There's several other good books as well. The Money Confusion: How Illiteracy About Currencies and Inflation Sets the Stage for the Crypto Revolution. John, this is kind of forward thinking, isn't it? This is kind of like trying to project what will happen 5, 10, 20, 50 years time. And, I think it's so important that we do that. So I recommend John's book to everybody. Please, you can get it there on Amazon and all other good booksellers, I'm sure, online. And there's other good ones as well. Educate Your Minds Economically. It's very important that we do that. John, thank you so much again for being here with us this evening.
David, thank you so much. I'm flattered to be on. What a treat. You're wonderful.
No, absolute pleasure to have you. Thanks, everybody, on all the different streams. I see all your different comments. Thanks for spending this time with us. And we shall return on Wednesday evening. So we'll catch up with you folks then. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from John and myself. Goodbye.